excited for y'all to join us, and we really hope that everybody can help get involved. So one of the biggest things about Powered by Youth is we use relational organizing, which is getting people to the polls by talking with your friends, your families, your neighbors, and really explaining to them the needs to vote. And so in a 2020 Tough Circle Institute conducted a study that found over 2/3 of all young Texas voters had never been contacted by a political campaign. This number went up to 75% for Hispanic and Latinx young voters. Young people's lack of turnout in these elections is not complacency, it's a lack of contact. So how do we fix this? We would like to have y'all join Powered by Youth to help young people find their voices and get out to the polls. We can do this in a lot of ways, but we definitely recommend that y'all join us as ambassadors. And with that, I am extremely excited to introduce our next speaker, Calvin Boyce. Calvin was born in Texarkana and is the son of Luther and Marjorie Boyce. Calvin attended a local school district in Texarkana, Texas, and after graduation, he enlisted in the Marine Corps and served his country proudly. Now he's married to his incredible wife, Jacqueline Boyce. Together they have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. He is currently working at Red River Army Depot as a distribution process worker, and he is a member of Mount Orange Missionary Baptist Church where he serves as a deacon, Sunday school teacher, and sings in the school choir. In the church choir. Anyway, Calvin is actively involved in his community and works alongside his wife to make the change he wants to see in the world. He is a member of the Texarkana, Arkansas chapter of a Philip Randolph Institute. The local chapter's main focus is to ensure that everyone is registered to vote, which is what we're here to talk about today, so we are incredibly excited to have him. And with that, let's welcome out Calvin, the chapter's spokesperson.
Thank you very much. My name is Calvin Boyce, as she said. I'm from right here in Texarkana. I am affiliated with the A. Philip Randolph Institute, the local chapter of the APRI. It's called the Arkansas, Texas chapter of the APRI. Our major focus is voting, registering people to vote. And I won't take much of your time, so I'm going to say this right now, that I am well versed and I'm very aware, and I promise to practice the 5 B's of public speaking. And those 5 B's are, be brief, brother, be brief. So don't worry about it. I'm not going to be up here too much. Okay? But there's some things I just want to share with you. What we do in the Arkansas, Texas APRI chapter here in Texarkana, I'm the spokesperson, and my wife, Jacqueline Boyce, wave your hand back there, she is our president. And I just do what she says. She says talk, talk. And y'all don't have no problem with that. But our major focus is registering people to vote, voter registration. You know, as right now, I know you're very aware of, it seems that our country is trying to make that a bit harder than it has been, right? So that is something that is vitally important right now. Now more than ever, that it is important that we get people registered to vote. And how do we do that? The Arkansas, Texas chapter of APRI, what we do is we just walk the block. You have to go out and we go to communities, we knock on doors, we hang flyers, and we talk to people, and we reach out to them where they are, and we try to get them registered to vote. And I don't have long, but the other part that we do is we educate the voters. I was surprised when I began doing this work to find out how many people just don't know the process. They don't know the register. They don't know where to vote. They don't know when to vote. So these are some of the things that our chapter is involved in. Number 1, registering people to vote, going out knocking on the doors, and then when we're there, we educate them. Because it goes without saying, an educated voter is a powerful voter, right? And that's what that is our goal. That is our aim. And we do this sometimes by setting up in storefronts, catching people going to the market. We set up sometimes in church venues, outside on the weekends, catching people as they pass by, posting up the signs, come in and we'll register you on the spot. And this is some of the work that we do here in the Texarkana, Arkansas, Texas chapter of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. And again, we just try to get this work done. And if anyone is interested, if anyone would like to take in some of this type of work, you can find us on Facebook, and you're more than welcome to try to get with us and be a part of us. And we can, well, my wife, she will put you to work. So I would love to see somebody, or if you have time, to try to come out and be a part of this great work. And that's all I have for you. Now, I want to thank you for giving me pause. Thank you.
All right, guys, and now it is my absolute honor to endorse one of my favorite people ever, Beto.
Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. Sierra, thank you for getting us kicked off today and for the introduction. I want to thank Calvin Boyce for his words and his encouragement to us. That was really nice to be able to hear you today. And I want to also thank you for your service to our country. Calvin was in the Marine Corps and also spent some time at Fort Bliss, which is in my part of the country, out in El Paso, Texas. So thank you. Really appreciate you being here. Yeah. I don't know if we have Chairwoman Robertson of the party here in Bowie, but in her absence, I want to thank her and make sure that we get the word to her that we're grateful for her work and her leadership. And then I want to thank Pastor Watkins, who, Pastor Watkins, Twin City Church of Christ. We were going to set up, the original plan was to set up on that field over there. And not only was it a little warm outside, but there were fire ant hills all over. And so we love democracy, but I don't know if we love it that much that we would not go for that. And Pastor Watkins brought us inside and showed us some true hospitality and generosity. So Pastor Watkins, thank you. It's so good and feels so nice to be back in Texarkana. This is, if we were to do it in a straight shot, a 12-hour drive from my hometown of El Paso. So if you're coming to Texarkana from El Paso, you really want to have to come to Texarkana. You've got to just I did, and that's why I made the trip, but we didn't do it in one shot. We broke it up. I drove from El Paso to Midland, where we had a meeting just like this one. From Midland to Lubbock, in the bottom part of the Panhandle, we had a meeting just like this one. From Lubbock to Abilene, where we had a meeting, to Wichita Falls. We went to Gainesville, we went to Denton, we went to South Dallas, we went to Waxahachie. Last night, we were in Rains County, in a community called Emory. Some of you are very familiar with it, have been there, passed through there, maybe have even lived there. We had a meeting just like this one. In that case, we were outside, and it was a warm, muggy, soupy night that you were swimming through as much as you were walking through, as you were going from one place to another. And not something that we're familiar with in El Paso. We live in the Chihuahuan Desert, up in the Rocky Mountains. It can be very hot. It was 109 degrees in El Paso yesterday, but it's, as they tell you, it's very dry. And as long as you're in the shade or as soon as the sun sets, everything cools down. So it feels a little bit different here. And you all have these big things growing up from the ground that we call trees. You don't have as much of it. With all this lush green grass and plants and birds, and just life abounds everywhere. And it feels good. It feels good to be back. I think about Calvin and his service. The other veterans who are here who put their life on the line for the United States of America, who swore an oath not to a person and certainly not to a political party, but to the Constitution, to the rule of law, to this great democracy, what Abraham Lincoln called the last best hope of earth. The fact that we can pull this thing off, right? That we can, not perfectly, but better than just about anyone else in the world, freely choose those who will represent our interests in the Commissioner's Court, the City Council, and the United States Congress, and all the way up to the presidency in the White House. One person, one vote. It was a long time coming, and it didn't start that way. Back in 1776, or after the Constitution was written in the 1780s, you had to be a white man and a property owner at that. They didn't want anybody who didn't own any property because they felt like you could be purchased and therefore your vote corrupted. So there was voter suppression against just about anyone who didn't look like me and didn't own property. It was then expanded to white men who didn't own property. After a while, and certainly the Civil War, it was opened up to African American, and then immigrants gained the franchise through states across the Union until you get to the 19th Amendment. And through the 19th Amendment, women could finally vote and have a say in political life in this country. That's the short, abridged version of my American history lesson today. But the long time coming in bringing more people into this democracy, making sure we have more voices, more of the life experiences and expertise that we can bring to bear from what we know and what we've lived through when we make decisions about what we want for our community. The kind of schools we want for our kids when we participate in school board elections, or just what kind of direction we want to see this country take when we vote in federal elections. That right to vote, that democracy that we cherish, which sets us apart from so much of the rest of the world, who, no matter how hard they try, and sometimes no matter how hard we try, just can't pull it off. I mean, I don't know how many tens or hundreds of billions of dollars we have spent in Afghanistan trying to prop up a democracy. I don't know how many American women and men have died in part in that effort to make sure that they can have one person and one vote. And I think they're in a very precarious situation. And I'd be very surprised if in 10 years they have one at all. Same is true in Iraq. Same was true in South Vietnam a couple generations ago. We tried to prop up that so-called democracy. This is a pretty special thing. And it's why when Donald Trump won in 2016, though I did not support him, did not vote for him, I found so much of what he said on the campaign trail to be so objectionable. I went to his swearing in. I was a member of Congress. And I wanted to be there not to honor the man or his political party or his political views for that matter, but for the fact that it is almost a miracle to me that the man who had worked 8 years to set this country on a course that he believed would be the best for all of us, that was President Obama, was going to willingly hand power over to a man who vowed to undermine everything that President Obama had just done. And he did so willingly. He did so on that same stage. He did so with a smile. They greeted the incoming president-elect and wished him the best. And I don't want to mess with that. That's really special. You know, when I was last year, I was running for Senate. And we came awful close, 2.5 points from beating the sitting senator. It was the closest margin in I thought we were going to win. If you'd asked me on election day, the crowds that we were pulling in, the returns we were seeing in early voting, the feeling I had just in my gut, I thought we were going to win that thing. And when it became clear that we were not going to win that thing, and this is before all the votes were counted, but it was just about mathematically impossible that we were going to overcome the 200,000 plus vote margin that Senator Cruz had on us. You know what I did? I picked up the telephone and I called Senator Cruz. And I said, Senator Cruz, this is Beto O'Rourke. I just want to wish you well. You have won this race fair and square. Congratulations. And Senator Cruz said to me, thank you, Beto. You ran a great campaign. Really tough race. And I said, Senator Cruz, if I can ever be of help to you in any way, this is my cell phone, please call me. Because you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I fought as hard as I could to unseat you, but you're now our senator. You're Texas's senator. You've got to do good for all of us. So I wish you well. And that's probably the last time he and I talked to each other. But it was the right thing to do, and it's what we've been doing in America for 245 years. The person who loses the election congratulates the winner of the election, no matter how hard fought, no matter how tough the loss. Something different just happened in this country that strikes at the core of that democracy. You had somebody who fought hard, and President Trump did, who lost against the other candidate who fought just as hard, or maybe harder. That was now President Biden. And at the end of that race, and after the votes were counted in all the states, especially the battleground states like Georgia, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, like Arizona, the news networks declared that Joe Biden would be the next president of the United States. And then they go through this formal process where the electors are counted from each of the 50 states. And they do that in the halls of Congress on the 6th of January. And in between that election, and when the news networks called it, and when those electors' votes were to be counted by the members of Congress, something peculiar and unprecedented happened in our country. The President of the United States, the man with the biggest microphone on the planet, kept saying that he had won the election, and that there was widespread voter fraud, mysteriously concentrated in those communities with very large African American populations or communities of color, like Philadelphia, like Atlanta, like Detroit, like Phoenix, Arizona. Somehow, he was implying there was a correlation between this surge of African American voters who propelled President Biden to an electoral college victory in Georgia, where the last time the Democrat was able to pull that off was 30 years ago or more. Now, the man with the biggest microphone in the land, the President of the United States, someone whom, if we don't trust that person totally, we like to believe that they represent and they serve all of us. That man was telling all of us that what we were seeing, we couldn't believe. Do not believe your lying eyes, he said. Believe me instead. I actually won. Never mind those millions of votes to the contrary. The electoral college votes, that even in those Republican states, with the Republican governor, the Republican secretary of state, those men in positions of public trust agreed that, though they hated to admit it, Biden had won those states fair and square. The president said something totally to the contrary. Now, I don't blame those, and there may be some among us right now today, who believe the president. I was raised and taught to respect the president of the United States, to take him and hopefully sometime in the not too distant future her at their word, and get behind them, to wish them success. And so if you have the president telling you this, I think you can be forgiven for believing him. Tens of millions of our fellow Americans, by the way, believe it. And I don't think that every single one of them is a bad person, or that they're somehow terribly ignorant, or that they're a mortal threat to the country. They're doing what so many of us have done over the course of our lives. But those in positions of public trust and power who know better, beginning with the former president, and those members of Congress who were complicit in trafficking that big lie, and who even voted against the election returns that they were sworn to count, tried to overturn the election from the floor of the United States Senate. They together inspired a mob that invaded the citadel of democracy on the 6th of January. And for the first time since the War of 1812, those walls were breached, those windows were broken open, and the mob, waving Trump banners and the Confederate battle flag, entered the United States Capitol. 5 people, including a Capitol police officer who was sworn to serve and protect those members inside, were killed in the process. A gallows was constructed to hang the then Vice President of the United States right in front of the Capitol. And you have members of that mob swearing that they were going to murder the members of Congress where they worked. And I believe they would have. They would have murdered the Republican and Democratic members of that Congress. They were so angry because they had been told in this big lie that that election had been stolen from them, from their leader, President Trump. Following that, you have a special election in Georgia in January. 2 new senators were elected from that state, both, surprisingly for many who've watched Southern politics over the years, were Democrats, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. Close elections, again propelled by African American voters who turned out in record numbers in that state to decide the issue. On the heels of that election, Georgia introduces some of the most restrictive election laws anywhere in the country. Some, myself included, call that voter suppression. You might have another word for it, but essentially those laws try to restrict who can vote, and at what time they can vote, and whether they can be handed a cold bottle of water while they sit in or stand in a 6-hour line trying to cast their ballot, trying to respond to the fact that it's much harder for Republicans to win in that state going forward. So let's change the rules, move the goalposts back, try to make it a little bit harder on the other side and their voters. The problem is it wasn't just Georgia, it was in Iowa. It was in Florida, which signed a similar law, and it was right here in Texas where our own state legislature introduced SB 7. Now, SB 7 was introduced in Texas, which was already the hardest state in which to cast a ballot or register to vote. Over the last 8 years, for example, 750 polling places in this state, this fast-growing state, have been closed. That's more than twice as many as the closest state behind us. And those 750 polling place closures, the vast majority of them, were in the fastest-growing Black and Latino neighborhoods in this state. So when you see people waiting in line at Texas Southern University, a great historically Black college in Houston, Texas, for 5, 6, 7 hours, very often the news story is, look at these courageous patriots willing to stand in line, endure the heat and the conditions and the weather and the wait in order to cast their ballot. All of that is true. But I also feel a deep and profound sense of shame that anybody has to wait 6 hours to cast their constitutionally guarded right to vote in an election. And that they're waiting 6 hours because we've closed all the other polling places in the precincts that surround the one in which they're voting. That happens all over the state of Texas. In 2017, a 3-judge federal panel called the congressional districts that define where we vote and who we can vote for a racial gerrymander. Now, what does that mean? It means that there's a good chance that if you're Black, if you're a voter of color in this state, you are drawn out of one district and placed into another to diminish the power of your vote and the likelihood that you would vote at all. It was a cynical ploy on the part of Republicans, thinking that if you're Black, if you're brown, you're likely to vote for Democrats. So we're going to diminish your power and concentrate the power of white voters in this state. Not me saying it, 3-judge federal panel saying it, appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents, right? This isn't a Republican or a Democratic issue, it's just an issue of democracy, and it seems on its face to be wrong. And here's the third. Voter ID laws. And this one sometimes is controversial. Folks say, hey Beto, as they did in Rains County last night, I need an ID to get on an airplane. I need an ID if I want to go to a casino and gamble my money. I need an ID to open a checking account. Why shouldn't I have an ID to vote? Don't we want to safeguard the integrity and sanctity of the ballot box? Don't we want to prevent fraud? And I think I could probably get there, or pretty close to there. Why not have ID? It's just that the ID that's accepted in Texas disproportionately excludes the very young, like Sierra, the very old, like our grandparents or our great-grandparents, the very poor, those with disabilities, and very often correlated with communities of color in Texas. Last night we heard of somebody who talked about their 85-year-old mother who doesn't drive, no longer has a driver's license, has a hard time getting a state-issued ID because she doesn't have the money or the ride to go pick one up, and so she's not voting. In Texas, you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at any of our institutions of higher learning to prove who you are at the ballot box. So my proposal to the group in Rains last night and to you tonight is, what if we expanded the number of allowable IDs in the state of Texas, or defray the expense for those who are having a hard time because of poverty affording to pay for them. That could be a solution to it, but not yet accepted, and explains why we are 50th out of 50 states in terms of ease of voting and voter registration. On top of all that, SB 7 this year was going to make it even harder. It was going to do away with Sunday morning voting, souls to the polls, disproportionately use by black voters across the state of Texas. It was going to make it harder for those with a disability to cast a ballot. It's going to be harder if somebody drove you to the ballot box. They might do away with curbside voting. And if you have a disability and you want to vote by mail, and you're not 65 years or older, they're going to require you to disclose the nature of your disability. Until now, Texas always took your word for it. You have a disability, not our business to ask you the details, request that absentee ballot, vote by mail, do it securely, no fraud, no problem. Now we're going to ask that Vietnam War veteran who came back 50 years ago to this country that he defended with his life with post-traumatic stress disorder, who's voted in every election absentee because he just will not go into the polling place because it produces too much anxiety for him. We're now going to ask him to prove that he has post-traumatic stress disorder. The young woman who just came back from Afghanistan, prove that you have traumatic brain injury. The young man who has clinical depression and does not want anyone to know, prove that you have clinical depression, and then disclose that to a complete stranger here in Bowie County, who's now going to have that information, and maybe that's going to get out to somebody and affect their prospects down the road. That's none of my business. It's none of anybody's business, but the state of Texas now wants to make it the business of anyone who wants to vote absentee in an election. And then most alarmingly of all, SB 7 included a provision that would allow Texas to overturn elections simply based on the allegation of fraud. Now, why does that worry me? I mentioned the big lie, and the former president trying to overturn those elections in Arizona and Georgia and Michigan and Pennsylvania. What if a state legislature passed it into statute, allowing a future state legislature, say in 2024 or 2028, to say, you know what, no matter what the voters of Texas said in this presidential election, or this congressional race, or this county commissioners contest right here in Bowie, we think there might have been fraud, so we're going to overturn that election. You then no longer have a democracy by any measure or any definition that rings true to me. That's what we're up against in this country. It's the big lie. It's political violence that we see in the highest places of power, in the very sanctum of our democracy. And it's voter suppression laws that are winding their way through 47 different state legislatures in this country. When Calvin swore that oath to the Constitution and said, I will willingly give my life to this country, he was also signing an oath to this democracy. It's what men and women have done going back to the Revolutionary War up through till today. It's also what civil rights leaders and marchers were willing to do throughout the Deep South, throughout the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, the original era of Jim Crow, trying to register voters in Mississippi would get you killed. And there were those who were killed registering voters in Mississippi. Crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge from Selma to Montgomery could get you killed. And there were those who were killed trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, marching for voting rights in 1965 in Selma, Alabama. So there are men and women who laid down their lives for this democracy. It was purchased at extraordinary cost for all of us, and we are the ones who inherited that sacrifice. It has come to us to decide what it is that we will do with it. Will we allow this last best hope of Earth to perish from the planet, as Abraham Lincoln feared at the end of the Civil War? Are we going to end this not with a bang but a whimper, as one state legislature after another reduces and ultimately withdraws the right to vote based on the color of your skin or your condition of ability or some other meaningless difference between us? Are we going to allow political violence to rule the day? Some of you may think that we solved the problem on the 6th of January. The invasion was stopped, the forces were repelled, the FBI is bringing those men and women to justice one person at a time, case closed. But others, myself included, might just see it as the beginning of a much larger problem. 1923, Adolf Hitler leads the Vierfall coup. He's jailed, he's stopped, he's thought of as a clown, just a bunch of crazy seditionists and insurrectionists who are trying to topple the democratic Weimar Republic. It's not 10 years later that he becomes Chancellor of Germany, the most powerful man in that country, soon to be the most powerful country in Europe. one that would threaten our very democracy here in the United States of America. That's what happens when this slip turns into a slide. And the slide moves us from democracy to tyranny or fascism or some other form of government altogether. Now that may sound bold, it may sound dramatic, it may sound a bit much, but I would not make this trip from El Paso to Texarkana. I wouldn't leave here from Texarkana to travel to Marshall and other communities in East Texas. I wouldn't then go to Houston and Austin and other cities in our great state if I did not feel so strongly about the threat that is before us at this moment. And if we are truly government of, by, and for the people, then there are and cannot be any sidelines in this contest. All of us are engaged. And to decide not to do anything at all is a choice that you might make. To decide that you will fight this with all you've got is a choice that I hope you will make. Here are the options before us as I see them. And then we've got 2 microphones. I'll turn the other one over to you and listen to what you have to say. The first, that Senate Bill 7 that I talked about in Texas, that would make the toughest state in which to vote even harder, didn't pass thanks to the state House Democrats who stood their ground and walked out and voted for it. There will be likely a special session where the governor will try to force this bill, some version of it, it may be worse, maybe better, we don't know, but it can't be good, through that special session. Your state representative, your state senator needs to hear from you. And sometimes it can seem a waste of breath, or a waste of an email, or a waste of a text message. But I guarantee you, having served in the El Paso City Council, having served in the United States Congress, those who reach out to us make an impact on us. The number one imperative for anyone in elected office is not to necessarily do good for the country or to make it easier for people to get health care or to find a job that pays a living wage. It's to get reelected. Everything else seems to follow from that. Once you get in office, you think that you're necessary to do all those other things, so you got to keep getting into office. That's the way the thinking goes. If those in office feel that their ability to stay in office is compromised by the position that they've taken on SB 7, then they may take another position altogether. So that's the first thing I ask you to do, is to reach out to your state legislator, even if they voted for it last time. Let them know that they don't have to vote for it next time. Second thing that we can do is to look to the federal government, much the way we in Texarkana and El Paso, Mississippi, and Georgia look to the federal government at the end of the first Jim Crow period. Martin Luther King, Andrew Young went to visit Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964, urging him to pass a voting rights bill. They said, Mr. President, in our home states, in Texas, if you're black, you can't vote. The poll tax applies to you, and you only. The literacy test to you, and to you only. The deterrence to registration applies only to black voters. There are some counties that are 90% African American, and there's not a single black voter on the rolls. That's not by accident, Mr. President. It's not that black voters are apathetic. It's that they may very well risk their lives if they try to register. And that can't be good. And Mr. President, this cannot be a democracy if so many millions of our fellow Americans are not allowed the franchise. And Johnson says to Andrew Young and to Dr. King, you're right, I want to do this, but I can't. I do not have the power. Congress will never go for this. Andrew Young and Dr. King leave the Oval Office, and dejected Young turns to King and says, what do we do now? And Dr. King turns to him and says, we go out there and we find the president some power. Over the next year, they and other civil rights leaders, everyday Americans like you and like me, took to the streets. They marched. They lit up the switchboard at the White House and on the Senate side and the House side of the United States Capitol. They shocked the conscience of the country into action. And a week before President Johnson calls a joint session of Congress, March 15, 1965, the week before, John Lewis, 24 years old, leads that march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And the marchers, as you know, are beaten. Lewis almost within an inch of his life. And when Johnson begins that speech the week later, the next week, he points the members of Congress to that example. He said, what happened in Selma cannot make us proud, but it must spur us to act. All these men and women want is the ability to vote. And you, ladies and gentlemen of the House and the Senate, have the power to confer it upon them. And they did. That bill passed, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, ushered in the first true multiracial democracy in American history. That is exactly what is under attack right now. And so I see a similar response to that last opportunity. There's a bill in the United States Senate right now called the For the People Act. It's Senate Bill 1. It passed the House of Representatives, where it was House Bill number 1. Most Democrats support it. The president said he will sign it. There are a couple of intransigent members of the Senate who haven't yet gotten behind it. Now, we may think that all hope is lost, that we're not going to be able to move forward. Some of the smartest minds in Washington, D.C. are saying that that's the case right now. But I feel it is very much the same situation that Dr. King and Ambassador Young ran into in 1964 with President Johnson. It's just a matter of you and I and our fellow Texans and Americans finding the president some power. My belief is that if President Biden makes this his number one priority, realizes that whether it's infrastructure or climate or gun violence or the economy or healthcare, all of those things only become possible when all of us are able to vote. And as you see one state after another denying or bridging that right, then it's time that we get it right. I think if we do that, and if he hears us loud and clear, there's a chance, maybe, just maybe, that we get the For the People Act through. That bill, by the way, it would roll back all of these voter suppression efforts through each state that has already passed them. It would expand the right to vote throughout the country. Automatic voter registration. You turn 18, you're registered to vote, and you're ready to go. Same-day voter registration. You moved here from Arkansas, you forgot to update your voter registration, it's election day, no problem. You show up to vote, we will register you here in Bowie County, no problem with that. It would get big money out of our politics, and it would stop members of Congress from choosing their own voters instead of the other way around. It sets up independent, nonpartisan redistricting commissions, and makes Election Day a national holiday. So it gets us back to our roots as the world's greatest democracy, as we tell ourselves and everyone else. We have a chance to walk that talk, and we can do it if we pass that bill. So I want you to consider making a phone call to the President of the United States. Call that White House switchboard. If you signed in earlier, we'll send you a link that has all the information and the phone number to do that. Consider, maybe, just maybe, leading a march here in Texarkana, or New Boston, or any of the communities around here in East Texas, to the courthouse steps and invite the members of the press to watch you do that. Imagine the surprise on the president's face when he opens up USA Today or the Washington Post, and there's a picture out of Texarkana of 50 people who are out there marching on an unbearably hot day like this one, sweat pouring down their faces, just trying to get themselves some democracy. Now, they might expect it out of Boston, they might expect it out of places that are thought to be a little bit more blue. If it came out of here, it would do twice the power that it would do coming out of anywhere else in Texas. And if that is compounded by marchers in Rains, in Abilene, Wichita Falls, and Midland, the other cities that we've been to so far, I think people are going to sit up and take notice. So that's the second idea. Let's get our federal government involved and pass voting rights legislation. Third and last one. This is the insurance policy. And this is my effort to follow the lead set by Calvin Boyce. Today, I walked over to, after we parked in front of the courthouse, walked over to the elections department here in Bowie County. And I got certified to be a volunteer deputy registrar in this county, which makes me street legal to add people to the voter rolls as long as they fill out a form that I provide them with. And we drove over to a neighborhood here in Texarkana and just started knocking on doors and meeting voters. and future voters. And we met some who can't vote. 2 or 3 people told us they're on parole or probation, they're still on paper, they can't vote. And I said, ma'am, as soon as you come off paper, know that your rights are restored and you can sign up to vote again. So just let's make sure that we have that in the back of our mind and are ready to do that when that day comes. Others said, you know what, I'll think about it. Give me one of those voter registration forms with the self-addressed stamped envelope. And I may fill it out and I might send it in. Hey, that's better than nothing. But the best part was at the end of the walk when Cynthia and I came upon 2 men who were finishing the end of their workday. Cynthia, I think their names were Leonard and Josh. Leonard and Josh walked up to them, asked them if they wanted to get registered to vote, and they said yes. And it felt so good, and it felt like all the sweat and pouring down my back, my shirt sticking to me, was worth it to be out there talking to people, meeting 2 men who might very well make the difference in the next election that is held here in Bowie. Or it might make the next election in the state of Texas. Or it might make the next election really mean something on a national level. Or it might just mean something to them, that they're registered to vote and they're engaged in our politics. This is an insurance policy because there are 7 million of our fellow Texans who are eligible to vote in 2020, the most important election since 1860 at least, who didn't vote. 7 million in this state. Now, 700,000 would seem like a lot. 1 million would be too many. 7 million. Eligible, many of them ready to go, like already registered, but didn't vote, didn't have a choice in the matter. 2 million of them were not registered. What if we brought those 2 million online? We forgot to get a commit to vote this time. What if we brought those 2 million online, on the rolls, here in Bowie and the other 253 counties of Texas, and then stayed in touch with them, and engage with them, not in 2022 in October, tell them it's time to vote early, here are your polling locations, but stay in touch with them now in 2021. How are you and your family doing? What's important to you? You shared with me that you're making the minimum wage $7.25 an hour and you're working 2 jobs. Are you keeping up okay? Do you need any help? Can I point you to any services? Can I be there for you? Imagine if that were part of our democracy going forward. I think that even if we are unsuccessful in stopping voter suppression in Texas at the state level, even if we cannot compel President Biden to use his awesome power to move voting rights legislation through the Senate, we could perhaps register enough voters in Texas to unrig the system just by the sheer numbers of people that we can bring to the polls. Every single one of us in this room, I think almost without exception, except for those of you who live in Arkansas or are not yourselves already registered to vote, can become a volunteer deputy registrar. It's called a BDR. And that allows you to register your friends, your neighbors, your family members. And I'll let you know something. For those of you who are single and for whom the dating apps have not worked, this is the perfect excuse to walk up to someone in the grocery store and say, excuse me, sir, I see you about to purchase these Cheerios. Are you registered to vote? And let the conversation start. Get that voter registration dispensed with out of the way and just see where that relationship goes. Whatever compels you to do it, though, it's easy. It'll take you 15 or 20 minutes at the elections department, and then you're off to the races. And then you're doing more than just voting. You're doing more than just tweeting about it. You're doing more than just yelling at your TV. You are person by person bringing people back into this democracy that is so imperative at this moment. So I just wanted to have a chance to share this with you, get some of this off my chest, and I hope also to bring some of us together in a common fight. If you're like me, at times you feel impotent, frustrated, like, what can I do? I'm just one person. But there are a lot of us one people in this room right now. There are a lot of rooms like this one that we've been to just over the last 8 days, and I'm going to be on the road for the next 2 weeks doing this each and every single day in a different community. I think if we expand from here, talk to the people in our lives, there might be no stopping us, but it really is going to be up to us. So, thank you for taking the time to be here today, for listening to me, hearing me out. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And Cynthia Donnell, who's on your left over here in the white shirt has a microphone. If there's a question you'd like to ask, or a point you'd like to make, and by the way, you do not have to agree with me. And there are Democrats here, I hope there are Republicans here, I hope there are independents here, I hope there are folks who don't belong to a political party here. You don't have to agree. I'm happy to hear your point of view, as is everyone else. So let's have a respectful conversation among friends. Yes, sir.
Don't you think it would be helpful to have a Governor Beto to
Thank you for being here, and thank you for the question. I want to see this fight through, this fight that I just described to the end, to its conclusion, for a couple of reasons. One, it may not matter who the candidate is if we don't have free and fair elections. If it's not one person, one vote in the state of Texas. I mean, I think I've made the case over the last 8 years, they've really stacked the deck. They've really rigged this system. If it gets much worse, it's going to be that much harder. So I want to make sure on that count, and then just because I believe in this democracy, that we get this done. But after that, I really do want to think about, with you and others, what it is I can do to best serve this state. And that might be as a candidate, it might be supporting candidates. In whatever way, I'll be in for the distance, and I'll be in with you all. So I really appreciate the comment and the question. Thank you. All right, Ms. Connor.
I just wanted to maybe kind of make a remark about something. I live in Morris County, Missouri, and during the election, we had the mail-in ballots, right? So my husband, for the first time, was 65, and he got a mail-in ballot. Filled it out, got it in the mail, sent it out, and probably a week or so later, another ballot came in the mail. So he just pinned it on the wall, and he's like, "Why did I get another ballot?" You know, and he said, I'm not gonna send in two, I'll give it, trouble or something. So I checked, because I was working for the poll. So I asked about it, and I said, my husband got a second ballot in the mail, and do you guys understand why? And they said, oh yeah, it was a mistake on the original ballot, so we sent out another one. And so I was like, so how was he supposed to be aware that that the first ballot was a mistake? And the ballot came really close to the deadline for mail-in. And I found out I immediately got him to fill it out and drop it off. I didn't let him mail it in, I made him drop it off. And then my sister, she had one, and it came to her mailbox, and she called me, and she was like, I got another ballot in the mail. And I was like, get it, mail it out, take it there, because they made a mistake. Okay, I also work for assisted living, right? So with elderly people. So I was talking to one of the residents, and I asked her about it. And she said, oh yeah, well, I didn't mail it in, I put it in the trash. So her vote didn't count. And I'm curious to whether this happened in very many counties, or was Morris County one of the only ones? Because I know that meant that a lot of people that mailed in, they didn't remail those ballots, because it looked the same. They didn't put a stamp on it saying, like revote or anything like that. It looked exactly the same way. But they said that it was a mistake, and all of those that had been mailed in were destroyed, and they resent them out. So do you know if this happened in other counties, or was this just
This
county, or have you heard of this before?
No, and I'm so glad that you're here and that you shared that with us. This is the first that I'm hearing of it. And so it may be unique to Morris County. I'm going to ask Cynthia, and we have folks who are taking notes, to help me to follow up and to find out what happened, and then maybe to publicize that. And it sounds like there was a human error, a mistake made. But then when they tried to correct the mistake, they didn't do so in a way that made it very clear or transparent to voters what had happened and what they were being asked to do next. And again, whether you're voting for Republicans or you're voting for Democrats, that's unimportant. You should just know that your vote is going to count, and you shouldn't be afraid that you're going to do the wrong thing.
The lady that at the nursing home, she was a Republican, she was voting, but she didn't get the vote, And so that meant all the elderly people that got those things, they didn't resent it. They
Yeah.
just threw them out. So I don't know how many counties this happened in, but if it happened in very many, you'll be like, you didn't win.
Thank you for sharing that. And I gotta tell you, in order for us all to believe in democracy, we don't have to be Democrats, but we believe in democracy. I think to build additional goodwill and demonstrate good faith, let's make sure that we help anyone, be they Republican or Democrat. When we were knocking on doors in Emory and Rains County yesterday, we encountered a gentleman who said, you know, I want to vote, and I want to register to vote, and I want to vote for Trump, but my felony conviction won't allow me. And I, had half a second, I was like, great, I'm just going to turn away and let him think that that's the law. Well, that's not the right thing to do. And I said, sir, as long as you're off paper, and he said, this was 20 years ago, and I said, no, you absolutely can vote from what you told me. And we went ahead and we followed up with the elections department in Rains County on his behalf. He didn't have a home phone or a cell phone, but we got his address, and I said, is it okay if we share your information with the elections department? He said, sure. And we did that. I think the way you just described it, where you're just concerned about someone who threw away their ballot, and you don't care who they were going to vote for because you just know that that's wrong. We got to get back to that. I'd like to think that's who we are at our core, and we're not trying to cheat some to the benefit of others. So thank you for doing that. And we're gonna look at Morris County. Miss Cynthia, you'll make sure that we follow up afterwards. Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here. Yes, sir.
I know there are other Arkansans here. I'm chair of the Real City Central Committee.
Oh, wonderful.
And I want to invite anybody that is an Arkansan who wants to work with the Democrats to come and join our committee. We will be meeting on the 25th at 5 o'clock at 403 East 9th. So anyone that'd like to come and see what we're about, we're going to be emphasizing voter registration, candidate recruitment. We've had some changes in our state law that are going to make it a lot easier to run. Filing fees are much lower than they were. So anyway, anybody that wants to come, 5 o'clock, 403 East 9th on the 25th.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. Appreciate you sharing that. And warm welcome to anyone who is from Arkansas, who's with us. I think these issues pertain to you as well. And it's funny, I was talking with a reporter earlier today who asked me about, what do I think about the border problem? And now I see it's all these Arkansans coming over. Not so much the ones in the Utah. Yes.
Good evening, Mr. We've been on our way there. So I know you've probably been catching hell about this one since 2019. My question for you is, in September of 2019, you remarked during a debate, and it is pretty close to verbatim, but it's been a while, kind of given up on watching the news. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15 and your AK-47. My question for you is today, how does one justify not only the loss of infrastructure and property, but the guaranteed loss of life as a result of mass confiscation? How does one justify the bloodshed in American lives that will certainly be wasted because these people committed the crime of owning the wrong type of piece of metal? How much blood, how many thousands of gallons of innocent blood are you, sir, comfortable washing your hands in to enact gun control? How many families will receive a folded flag? How many people will bury their sons and daughters because they decided, no, I will not die subjugated to my government because I was not allowed to own the same tool to defend myself that I carried in Afghanistan, that I carried as a rover aboard a warship? How many people are you comfortable wasting like livestock? In 2020, I was a member of the large gathering you may be familiar with in Austin, August 1st. 1 week after the death of Garrett Foster, a Black Lives Matter protester, who was shot by a motorist that drove through the road barricade into the protest. That night, we were, well, at worst, loitering. In the state of Texas, you're allowed to open carry a rifle wherever you please, with some few exceptions, liquor stores, hospitals, places that get in the way anyway. Usually if I'm in a liquor store or a hospital, my hands are occupied. So that night, Austin Police Department drew down on us for the crime of existing and exercising a constitutional right. Very nearly got everyone there killed. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that should you begin shooting me, I might retort by shooting you back in order to stop you. What is going to happen when we see Waco, Texas in 1993 repeated everywhere in this country, every single day for the foreseeable future? I cannot justify this, and having asked this question of several other politicians in support of gun control, I've yet to find anyone else that can.
Let him answer.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you asking the question. So as you know, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The month before I said that, and I did say that, and I do believe that you shouldn't be able to carry the same kind of weapon that you just said you carried in Afghanistan, that you carried in military service. I do think that military weapons belong on a battlefield, and civilian firearms belong with civilians. And I have no problem with your ability to carry a firearm for self-defense, or to hunt, or to target practice, or to collect, or for whatever reason. But when you have something that's designed and was engineered and sold to militaries for the exclusive purpose of killing people, because it's just so good at it. It wasn't built to do anything else. That high impact, high velocity round, it shreds everything inside to keep the enemy soldier down that you just shot, so that he can't get back up and threaten you again. And the month before, a guy with an AK-47 that he legally purchased, but was so disturbing to his mother that when he got the weapon, she called the Allen Police Department and said, "What the hell does my son need with this weapon of war?" And they said, "Ma'am, he's perfectly within his rights to own it, and there's nothing we can do, so good luck." And inspired by Donald Trump and this paranoia that the then president stoked about Mexican Americans and Hispanics and invasions of brown people coming to this country, this guy drove that weapon of war 600 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso, walked into a Walmart on a Saturday before school started in 2019, and opened fire in a matter of minutes, killed, ended the lives of 23 people, grandparents, moms and dads, kids, and grievously wounded many others. And I got a chance to know so many of those families. I went to so many funerals, I can't remember the number. And I've talked to so many people, even recently, a few weeks ago, who still live in fear, who feel because they are Hispanic. And this man published a manifesto before the shooting and said, "I've come to repel the Hispanic invasion of Texas. These Hispanics are taking over politically." By the way, not unrelated to everything that I just shared with you about the big lie, the insurrection, and the voting laws that we have in the state. So Mexican Americans in my community, understandably, often feel as though they have a target on their back. So that's why I said that. I don't think anyone should own an AR-15 or an AK-47, but I recognize full well that the vast majority of those who own them don't plan to use them against anybody else, have not used them against anybody else, and likely will not use them against anyone else. It's just that when they are used against others, in movie theaters, in supermarkets, in high schools, in grade schools, they kill at a rate and with an effectiveness and efficiency that's unmatched by any other weapon. That's why I feel the way I do. Now, I know enough to understand that the political possibility of my proposed solution, that there would be not only a ban on selling these kinds of military weapons going forward, but that we would buy back every AR-15 or AK-47 that exists out there, is unlikely. I understand that. But I also understand, and I'm willing to work with you on this if you're willing to work with me, that we could probably do better, and you and I could probably agree on how we can do better than what we have right now. No other country on the planet has the level of gun violence and gun death that America has. And it's not because we are inherently bad or violent or evil. That's not true. It's that we have gun laws in this country that benefit gun manufacturers, benefit the special interest organizations like the NRA, and don't benefit the people whose lives are so often lost to gun violence in this country. So perhaps we could find common ground on universal background checks. Maybe or maybe not, you think that the permitless carry was a bad idea. In fact, our license to carry laws in Texas were something that we could have been proud of. You can carry a firearm in public, we just want you to go through some training. We just want to do a background check to make sure that you're not going to use that against your wife or against somebody in your school or against yourself, because suicide by gun is so common in our communities right now. 6,000 people were denied a license to carry a firearm in Texas last year. That's why so many police officers and police chiefs were against the permitless carry bill that was just passed. So I hear you that you and I sharply disagree on the issue of AR-15s and AK-47s. My hope is that that doesn't have to define what is possible between us, and that instead, whether it's permitless carry, universal background checks, and extreme risk protection order, that we can find some common ground. But I sure do appreciate the fact that you came here, that you said something that you knew was going to be in sharp contrast to what I feel, and that you proved that we can still pull this off, that we can agree and disagree civilly, peacefully, and without resorting to force. So thank you for being here. Thank you.
Hi, Beto. I would just like to first say thank you so much for the work that you did down on the border with the reason that I wanted to bring that up, although it's not the topic of conversation, is just that I felt like that largely went unrecognized in the midst of everything else that was going on. Secondly, thank you for coming back to Bowie County. I'm not the sheriff anymore, but I'm definitely glad to see your face again down here. And sir, regarding your question just now, I appreciate you being here. I think that a lot of the time we're afraid to talk to each other. And I just want to say that as a mom, and I am single, I have a firearm. And I'm a Democrat, and I have a firearm for personal protection, okay? I think that there's a large misconception that as Democrats, we're trying to take everybody's guns away. And I don't think that that's the truth of the matter. I think what we're looking for, especially as being a mom, is that someone doesn't have the ability to come into a school or a shopping mall and murder our children quickly and rapidly.
Like the ATF at Waco did, right?
Well,
with fire and tanks. Remember that? Anyone? Waco?
That's not a school.
we
Not a school.
Right, over
Waco.
machine guns, right? Over someone. Then when you come,
We hear you.
hold on.
She's
Don't send a
speaking.
uniform cop.
She's
You
speaking.
come on your own for that.
It's okay.
I hear you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for being here.
Bye.
Bye, Felicia. Okay, everyone that is here, if you live in Bowie County, please follow Bowie County Democratic Party on Facebook. We put out information, we share a poster powered by the people, and we also put out information about how to contact your congressmen and senators. My comment, it's not a question, but it's a comment. To reiterate what Beto said, it's not just one person. Together we can make a difference. I know that was proven with healthcare. This is obviously, it's the fourth most conservative congressional district in the United States that we live in here in Bowie County. But our relentless phone calls made a difference with healthcare. And so I know that they can with voting as well. You have to take 5 minutes to make that phone call and do it daily, but it can make a difference. And so I just wanted to reiterate that point because it is overwhelming when you live somewhere like Bowie County that you know that the majority of other people aren't in agreement with what you think. But if you make those phone calls, it can make a difference.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Appreciate that.
Just a little information. I watched Attorney General Garland's speech this morning. For those of you that didn't see it, he has announced, irregardless of whether the John Lewis voter right act passes or not. He is doubling the attorneys for the NAACP for future wrongdoing in the voting.
That's good to hear. I didn't see that.
And incidentally, I flipped over to Fox, so-called fake news, and they were talking about horse racing.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. I don't think I can use this. So, I agree with your sayings of having someone be 18 once so they can start voting. And I would love to see people out there rallying to get more voters. But I think the people that you really want to talk to and address your message are just not here today if you look around and read the room. So what are your plans to actually get the people that you want the message to get across, to get them to go out and want to participate?
Yeah, this is a great question. For those who couldn't hear, I'll take the spirit of the question that we're excited about everyone who's here, but young voters, perhaps, or voters who aren't represented proportionate to their share of the population in the voting booth aren't here with us having this conversation about voting and democracy. And so, what are we going to do about that? Part of it, I mentioned going door to door earlier today. So literally, like a doctor who makes house calls, somebody who believes in democracy, showing up at your door to register you to vote and have that conversation about why this is important. We spoke to a woman yesterday in Rains County, and she said, you know what, I'm sorry, I don't want any of that stuff. Don't register me to vote, I don't like politics. And I said, okay, that's fine, and totally respect your decision, but I asked her, if you could change one thing in your community, your life, in this state, this country, what would it be? And she paused and she said, I don't think it's right that there are so many people that I know in my life who work so hard and are still poor, who work more than one job and don't have enough to pay the rent or put food on the table without putting it on their credit cards or taking out a payday loan or borrowing from their mom or dad or family members. And she said $7.25 an hour is just not going to cut it. And I said, I agree with you. But I said the only way that's going to change is if we vote for people who are willing to pass laws that raise the minimum wage. And that means you've got to register to vote, you got to vote. And I can see something kind of switch on there and make that connection. Because if it's just, Beto says you got to vote or democracy is important, well, who the hell cares if I'm really busy just trying to make ends meet in my home? But if I'll spend some time with you at your door and say, part of the reason you're struggling so much is because we have people in power who can care less about you until you start voting and then they fear you. Well, we're not going to make any progress. So anyhow, we'll do that, and then you're going to be more effective at this than I am. But through social media and the platforms we have, and the young people that we've been able to reach there, the college campuses that we work on, the high school campuses where we're registering voters right now, I think that's going where those future voters are, and not assuming that they're ever going to come to me. So that's a great question. I saw that your hand was up, so if you have another idea, I want to hear it because I want to be good at this.
Oh, I'll just talk about it. So, I love the idea of door knocking because it's very old school and traditional. However, the younger people are making minimum wage, and most of the time they are at work. So I think even if you don't want to use social media, you could visit the businesses.
Yeah.
And I think that would be more effective. You could reach a lot more people faster. You will be hitting those younger people and older people that made not the best decisions during their lifetime that are stuck working as well. So, because going door to door, people are not there all the time. They're working, trying to make ends meet, like you said. I think that would help a lot more, especially since it is a lot more personable than going and talking to someone through Facebook, through the internet.
I hear you. I agree with you. And look, if you want to be part of this, Sierra mentioned Powered by Youth, Powered by People. Our whole organization exists to bring voters in. We registered 196,000 voters last year. I want to double that over the course of this election cycle, get over 500,000 voters. And we got to go everywhere. And it's funny, Cynthia, I don't know when it was, 3 weeks ago, where one of our Powered by People volunteers was in a water broker and was able to register a mom who worked there and her son who was coming by to pick her up, which I thought was awesome. And so, you know, that's just one anecdote. We need to do more of that. But I think going where people are, nightclubs, bars, places of business. What is that?
Get your band back together.
Get the band back together. Play some music for some folks. I don't want to scare anybody off here, so anyhow, thank you for the ideas. Love them.
I just want to say my 20-year-old daughter, she would be here tonight, but kid work, so I'm going along with that.
Yeah.
Is
she registered to vote?
She is. She voted in her first presidential election.
That's great.
With Arlene, she was like, Mom, when are we going to vote? Mom, when are we going to vote? She was so excited. And all her friends, we got them registered. And they were just so excited about it. I was such a proud mom.
Oh, that's great. Here's the thing. If you want to text her and make a commitment for Cynthia as well, if she works with anyone, to the gentleman's point that you just made, who is not registered to vote, when we leave here, we'll go pick up wherever she works, a chicken sandwich or a T-shirt or whatever she does, and we'll go register her friend and embarrass her for you. So just let Cynthia know if you've got somebody to work with and register, we'll go register that. Hey there.
So, I have a question, and this is about Senators Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. I know they've been very apprehensive about abolishing the filibuster. Do you think that Joe Manchin will crack and do it? Because obviously Mitch McConnell is like, I'm vowing to block 100% of the Biden administration's plan. So how do you think they'll eventually, just abolish it?
Yeah, so this is a great question about the filibuster, and I'm still learning about the filibusters. I understand it. There are 100 senators in the Senate, but instead of needing 51 votes to pass something, you, for some reason, need 60 votes to pass something because of the threat of the filibuster. Filibuster just stops anything short of 60 votes. Senator Manchin has said, he's a Democrat, and he said he wants whatever the Senate does to be bipartisan. And I like that. I want Republicans and Democrats working together wherever we can. But I think there comes a time where the other side is no longer bargaining or operating in good faith. And when that other side can't even find 10 votes to investigate the January 6th insurrection, where the police officer who was defending the lives, and we gotta remember this, and this is something I'd love for Senator Manchin to understand from our perspective in Texas. That Senate Bill 7 here in Texas that would disenfranchise so many voters, it's not bipartisan. Only one party introduced it, only one party voted for it, literally along party lines. After the Civil War, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, so equal protection under the law, and 15th Amendment that the color of your skin or your status of former servitude would not have any bearing or impact on your ability to vote. 14th and 15th Amendment passed along strict party lines in the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives back in the 1860s and the 1870s. So at pivotal moments of civil rights, human rights, voting rights, we've seen party line votes. And it's perhaps not ideal, but it was the only way it was possible. And I caution us as Democrats, who I think, and I saw this from the former chair who was trying to be very polite to the young man who didn't want to respond in kind. We're so accommodating. We're so empathetic. We try to see things from your point of view. I think that's great, by the way. And there's nothing to be ashamed of around that. I think that's just being a good human being, right? But sometimes we do it to a fault. And you have one party that is inspiring insurrection and covering up for the insurrectionists. You have one party, and not every Republican, by the way, fits this description, but those in power sure do, who love white supremacy more than they love democracy. You have one power that is trying to steal elections, literally would allow the state of Texas to overturn them going forward based simply on the allegation of fraud. And you have another party that's searching for bipartisanship. If we don't get serious about this, those of us who happen to be Democrats, and fight tooth and nail peacefully, non-violently, for this democracy, I guarantee you we are going to lose it. So I hope Joe Manchin, who I know to be a good man and a good public servant and someone who deeply cares about this country and voting rights, I hope that Joe Manchin ultimately will do the right thing. I hope, who knows, because we're transmitting this on Facebook Live, I hope somebody in West Virginia is watching this, clips what you just said, and sends it to Joe Manchin, and he has a chance to do it. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Rourke, I don't feel like I know you because I watch you at NBC a lot. I see you on the
Oh, great.
Yeah. But hopefully before the people act will pass and all these draconian voter suppression laws will be put in the trash heap that they deserve. But I was wondering, should they pass, some of them get through here in Texas, what kind of penalty would they have, for instance, for people who would take a bottle of water to somebody who's in a line 4 hours down the street? What would they do if somebody did that? Are they proposing to not let that person vote, or to put the person who gives them the water in jail? Or what would they do?
So that provision specifically is in Georgia, not yet matched in Texas, although let's see what they come up with next in the special session. But yeah, in that provision, the volunteer is punished, the person who brings the water. I don't know if the voter is brought out of line and no longer able to cast their ballot, but it's ideas like that one where, I don't know if you've heard the story of Crystal Mason, who served time for a conviction, got out of jail in Texas. This is before the new voter suppression laws were passed. African-American woman is encouraged to go vote, shows up at the polling place, and they say, Ms. Mason, we don't see your name on here. Why don't you vote a provisional ballot, which is our way of protecting our elections from fraud. If Crystal Mason is in fact not registered, her vote won't count. Little did she know that because she had not fully served out the terms of her probation, that was illegal to do so. She got a 5-year prison sentence. Now I tell you that because the Attorney General of the state of Texas, who this is immaterial but happens to be twice indicted and is under a current FBI investigation, every senior lieutenant of his quit, alleging that he accepted bribes for whatever that's worth. He stood up an election integrity unit that prosecutes voter fraud. 72% of the prosecution efforts so far have been against black and brown Texans. So we talk about voter intimidation and voter suppression. Punishing somebody who's handing somebody a bottle of water in Georgia where the long lines are concentrated in communities of color is meant to scare people who live in communities of color from voting or participating in elections. It's just confusing. What will the penalty be? I don't know. Maybe I just don't want to mess with that stuff. Sending Crystal Mason to prison for 5 years for voting innocently on a provisional ballot, not knowing that she was breaking the law, and that vote, by the way, didn't count because it was on a provisional ballot, sends a message to all these other former felons that I met today, you know what, just best not to mess with that. Even though by law, once you satisfy your debt to society, you get your rights restored. So that's what I think is going on with the provisions in SB 7 that also include partisan poll watchers, being able to go into polling places and having free run of the place. Election judges won't be able to kick them out, and they'll be able to try to intimidate those folks who are coming to vote. So this is about intimidation. It's about suppression. It's about trying to keep people from voting who otherwise would be able to cast their ballot. And again, we don't care if that was for a Republican or a Democrat. Anyhow, that's why I think this stuff's coming up. Thanks for the question and for being here. Appreciate it.
Great, I have 4 more questions left.
Hi, thanks for coming. I like what you're doing, but there's something I take more seriously than you do, and that is I think if we lose it this time, if we don't get these voting issues resolved this time, and the Republicans win and take over, this is the end of democracy, period. I think it's not a thing we can wait until 2024 and 2026. And in that regard, that's all I can tell you. I have a lot of ideas. I think that Congress needs to move left, listen to the people. 75% of the people are to the left of the leaders of both parties. To the left of the majority members of Congress. Those people in Congress are supposed to represent that 75%. And if Biden has a mandate, it's that 75%. But they tend to want to get the polls redone. And they tend to, well, we got to have this partisan. You don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's what they're doing. And Manchin needs to, well, whatever. As to Texas, if you want to take Texas, I have one idea.
Let's hear it.
And can the Democratic Party, well, actually two, can they divorce the DNC, who does not respect democracy, and find an independent? The Democratic Party can go behind 100%, 150%, and see if the other states follow. Because the DNC has got to go too. It's not just the Republicans. There's no such thing valid as in democracy as superdelegates. Just like the Electoral College has to go. So for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're talking about democracy. We mentioned the filibuster doesn't sound very democratic. You know, my 10-year-old son Henry, try explaining to him how the vote to impanel a January 6th commission failed, even though 54 people voted for it and 35 people voted against it. He says, Dad, the side that wanted it got more votes. Why isn't that the law now? And I had to explain to him the filibuster. You then have the U.S. Senate, where Wyoming gets as many senators as the state of Texas. That doesn't sound very democratic to me. You have the Electoral College, which is based on, an ancient formula where it was only white men with property who had a say in our government. But even the DNC with superdelegates. So, I mean, if we're about democracy, we've got to be about democracy everywhere. And point well taken. And I also got to tell you what you said at the outset, that if we don't get this right this year, we really will lose it forever. And I don't know how we all shake the country out of its stupor. I know that so many people are working so hard, have so much going on in their lives, and it's hard to pay attention to something like this. It's like, I don't know what the metaphor is that lends itself to it. Is it that we're slowly being boiled in this pot and we don't realize the temperature's rising and we're being cooked to death? Is it that we're just so preoccupied with our divisions that are so meaningless that we don't see the overarching threat to our very foundation as a democracy, as a country? I don't know, but there was something that happened in 1965 that allowed or persuaded President Johnson to do the right thing when he had the power to do the right thing. And why didn't that happen in 1955 or 1945 or 1935? I think it was the people, and the people shook each other, and they marched, and they were willing to die. I'm not asking anyone to die here, but I am asking us to decide what we're willing to sacrifice and how hard we're willing to work and what kind of struggle we're going to enter in order to pull this off. Because if we don't, I really agree with you. It's over. And man, those of you who are parents and grandparents, if you need some motivation, imagine after this is over, if we lose, and look at your kids in the eye and they say, hey, Dad, Granddad, what the hell were you guys doing in 2021? They'd stormed the Capitol. They killed 5 people. They told you exactly what they were going to do if they got into power. And you guys just let them do it. What the hell? We kept it going for 245 years. And you were the ones who lost it. I can't. I'm not having that conversation with my kid, I want to make sure that we do this. And I have a little bit of hope every time I meet someone like you, or I'm in a room like this one, that we are. And I know it's not going to be easy. It's going to be the toughest thing we've ever done. But we got to be the toughest people we've ever known. And we got to pull it off. So I appreciate what you had to say. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Craig. I'm very flattered that you came to Texarkana because I know how discouraging it can be to come to a place where we meet people like that and are very vocal, but I would also just like to say thanks to you personally because our high school journalism department followed the race between you and Ted Cruz, and it was very inspiring that someone was fighting in Texas for things that we often feel injustice. I would encourage you to make yourself available to the communities that have been especially vulnerable. I know for me and a lot of the kids in the journalism department, it was the gay kids, it was the black kids, it was the girls who didn't feel like they could be themselves or be alone at night, and that just absolutely breaks our heart that we live in a society like that. And I just really want to encourage you to get out there and know that even though we're not as vocal as some people, that we really do encourage and believe in you, and that we'll be supporting you with whatever you do in the future.
Thank you. That's so nice. That's so nice. I just want you to know that it really is our honor to be here. And again, if we're going to come here from El Paso, it has to be as intentional as it gets, right? So this is absolutely where we wanted to be. And one of the things that I took from the last time I was here was, though it's very green and we have trees and we're in the desert and we're in the mountains and you border Arkansas and we border Mexico, and there's so many other things that you could say put us in two different states altogether. One of the things that I heard that felt very much like my experience growing up in El Paso is that this isn't a place that those in positions of power often visit or often care to listen to people in. You're far away from the centers of power, whether it's Washington, D.C. or Austin. I'm far away in El Paso from Washington, D.C. or Austin. It's an 8.5-hour drive for me to get to our state capital. I'm closer to the state capital of Chihuahua, Arizona, Mexico, and Colorado. I get to all of them before I can get to Austin, and therefore our leaders don't come out. They don't check in on us. They don't listen to us. They don't want to know what we think. If it is about the U.S.-Mexico border, they talk about it before visiting and listening to those of us who actually live there. And anyhow, I remember hearing that from those here in Texarkana that very often feel like you're left to your own devices. And good luck. And this is a place that's already spoken for, taken for granted, or forgotten, or left behind. All of those things feel like my experience in El Paso, but it doesn't have to be, right? And we can just as intentionally stay connected and stay in touch with one another and bridge the 12 hours between us in drive time. I hope that for those of you who are interested in joining Powered by People, I hope you do it that way. The website is poweredxpeople.org, or just in this fight for democracy. One of the ideas that we had is in the coming weeks, maybe even in the next 10 days, what if we all gathered in Austin, Texas? Like, it's not an easy drive for you. It's not an easy drive for me. But what if we demonstrate that we're willing to do the tough things right now? And it's not just the folks who live in Austin rallying in front of our state capitol. It's the people in Texarkana who want to be heard rallying in front of our state capitol. So if you or anyone else here is interested in organizing that effort, maybe even caravanning down to the state capitol, I'll meet you there. And Cynthia, it sounds like a good idea to you?
Yeah, great idea.
If you'll get in touch with Cynthia, we'd love to see if we can all meet up in the coming weeks or even in the coming days. First vote on the For the People Act, by the way, is coming up the week of the 21st of this month. And so, if we're echoing what happened in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, it's as though that bill was coming down the pike and Johnson was counting his votes in the Senate. That's what's happening right now in the United States Senate with the For the People Act. So a big rally in front of the state capitol sending a message to President Biden, you have the power to do this. That could be pretty powerful. So anyhow, no pressure, and I'm not volunteering you. But if you want to do it, we'd love to have you. Yes, Ms. Conlon.
Right here.
Oh, right here.
Okay, so two things. First, I saw you, I'm from here, but I was living in Midland in 2018. Saw you speak there, and you were as inspiring then as you are today.
Thank you.
I have been signed up with Resist Bot to contact my congresspeople. As a former congressman, would you take more notice of a phone call, an email, a handwritten letter, just because, honestly, sending the emails through that just kind of feels like all that really happens is I got on Ted Cruz and John Cornyn's email list, and now they're spamming me all the time.
Yeah.
So what would be the most influential way? And number two, in your time in Washington, this is just such a personal for me, did you ever get to meet the amazing Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg? And how was she in person?
Yeah. Two really good questions. The first, you get an email from your favorite politician. They say, Cynthia sign this petition. Say that you stand with me. Say that you're standing for voting rights. Most of you are already wise to this. The petition's not going anywhere. No one's reading it. You click on that, and the politician now knows that that's a live email address, and then they're going to send you a request for $15. I'll never do that. I'll never ask you to sign a petition because I don't even know what that means. I don't know if the petitions go anywhere. The email's a little bit more effective than the petition, which is not effective at all, but it really only counts when they come through in mass and when they are organically written. In other words, sometimes there's like a form, and in the congressional office they say, hey, everyone's reaching out to you on the pipeline or on prescription drug pricing or this specific bill, but 20,000 of them were all the exact same email that was run through the websites. That's the kind of petition thing, and you kind of dismiss that because was there any effort involved in clicking on that? Probably not. The phone calls matter a little bit more because now you're getting into human-to-human interaction. Someone in your office had to receive that call from that very concerned constituent. And at the end of the day, they come into the office, they say, hey, Beto, we just got flooded today on this issue. And especially if they are your constituent, because I'm thinking about my re-election, you can't help that's part of your calculus, even if it's a subconscious part of your calculus. You pay attention to that. But the most powerful and compelling thing that you can do is to be there in person. I always notice that if someone came to the office or if someone marched on the Capitol, or I remember a Black Lives Matter protest. It was after one of the police shootings of an unarmed black man that ended in his death. And organically, people just started coming to the United States Capitol. I just finished my last vote, and I could hear this churn of voices and yelling, and something didn't sound right, and I was drawn to it. And I went around the Capitol to the big west side, the big steps where you see the president inaugurated, and there was just massive people, and they were angry. And I'll tell you how angry they were. John Lewis, who was my colleague in Congress, which is nuts, John Lewis tried to speak to the crowd, and they shouted him down. And they said, we're tired of listening to you. And it was in an understandable anger. There's nothing that could justify what was happening in the country. They didn't want anybody to try to justify it or calm them down. That really got my attention. And it really showed that the country had reached a breaking point and weren't going to take it anymore. And it certainly focused my attention more sharply on that issue. So this idea to meet in Austin, if that's what we end up doing, or maybe someone will come up with the idea of caravanning to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Whatever it is, if that comes your way, think about jumping on it, because that will be a very good use of your time. That will be noticed, and that will change people. I don't know if you've been listening, but to the Republicans on SB 7, they're now saying that they're open to changing some of the provisions of it. And that didn't just happen because, they received revelation. It happened because there were angry constituents calling them and showing up at their offices. So that stuff really works. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I'm so embarrassed to tell you, I've never met her. And yet, she's in this room right now because in the Shelby versus Holder decision decided by that court in 2013, her dissent was just on fire. She said something to the effect of, just because you haven't ever gotten wet under that umbrella doesn't mean that you can pull that umbrella down. You're going to get soaked. And we pulled that umbrella down. The Supreme Court struck down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which is pre-clearance for states like Texas. And so Texas just went to town and dumped on the voters of the state. The voter ID laws were passed within minutes of that decision. She predicted with extraordinary prescience everything that came to pass and the moment that we're in right now. So I'm grateful for her, though I never got a chance to know her. Thanks for asking the question.
Okay, these are the last two questions.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thank you so much. Bless you for coming. Appreciate your support. You before. My name is Armando Valentino. The only Democrat to run for county judge, youngest person to ever run, and also the first person of color to run for the highest position in the county. The young man who was just here, I want to apologize first and foremost. I met that young man when we were doing the Black Lives Matter protest, and some people had actually threatened to come and shoot us. and he actually knew those individuals. He showed up here to protect us.
That's great.
Okay, first and foremost.
Yeah.
So he's a very passionate young man. He's young, 25, just turned 25. And so, not that his outburst was what it was, but those of you who are over 25, you've been 25 before, and passionate, you want to see some change, you have some concerns. So I'm personally apologizing to you on his behalf. Okay?
You don't have to.
Yes, but that's just how I was raised, okay? My question for you is, as having run an entire race, right? And registered, I hit 3,800 doors myself personally. Wow. And I think we registered about 4,500 people last time, which was, I think, the largest that's been registered in one season for Bowie County. I didn't see a lot of people out who are here right now, you know what I'm saying, when we were running. And in order for things to go forward, because I do plan on running, and I think some other people are running who are in the room, we're going to have these kind of numbers on a consistent basis, because what happens is that motion creates more emotion and gets people going. And so I'm challenging, and I'd like for you to please speak on this, please, because you've done a wonderful job. I'm challenging everyone to not let it only be when someone like Beto comes to town, or someone that we think is the next savior for us, that we show up like this. Because we have to be here daily, take our children to school, drive and shop here and pay taxes and go to court and fight whatever we feel is wrong. But because there's not enough of us together, we're usually showing up in 1 or 2 or 3 at the city council meetings or the county commissioner meetings. I'm challenging you all to show up like this when we make a call out or someone makes a call out, so that we can be in support here locally. Otherwise, just here locally, we're going to continue to have these challenges. Could you please speak to that and get some strategy on helping to do that, if you would, please, sir?
Yeah. You mentioned knocking on 4,000 doors yourself in the campaign, all the folks that you registered. And I did something similar when I ran for Congress, and that's how we beat the incumbent and the odds. We just kept knocking until it kind of created a wave. And I may share this story here, but I remember close to the end of that campaign, I knew we had a shot at winning, because I had walked into this diner. This guy stops me. He says he recognizes me. He said, "You knocked on my grandmother's door Thursday, and she invited you in. She told you about her son, who's in the Marine Corps, and her daughter, who's a school teacher, and you guys didn't really talk politics or policy or issues, and she didn't even know what party you are. But she loved the conversation, and you guys really hit it off. And that Sunday, this guy's telling me, I and my 32 other cousins were at her house for a big gathering in Nulo, and she made each one of us promise to vote for you. And he said, I never heard your name before, Bethel. I don't know who you are, but you're going to win this thing, so don't screw it up, right?" And I said, "Yes, sir." Then I didn't do that again, because I was in office, and I won re-election easily the next 2 times, and I didn't take it for granted, but I didn't knock on 16,000 doors, which is what I did that first time. And I'm realizing in hindsight that as hard as that would have been to do, I should have done that or something at least more than I did, because just as you mentioned, if we're waiting on the Savior, we're going to be waiting too long. We're going to miss it. If we're waiting for someone else to show up, or the cavalry to ride in, then it's over before it begun. When we recognize that it's not just during an election, and not just during when we're candidates. I don't know if you're now actively a candidate. I'm not. But if we're willing to do this in 2021, not wait until 2022, if we're even willing to do this knowing that we might not win in 2022, but it's worth organizing now so that we win at some point. Stacey Abrams in Georgia, NC UFA, the New Georgia Project, Fair Fight, they taught us after the last decade that registering voters year in, year out, losing elections, cycle in, cycle out, but bit by bit, persuading enough to have hope. And this is a cool line from Stacey. She says, "I didn't try to persuade people to vote for Democrats. I tried to persuade non-voters to become voters." She said that's what produced the wins in Georgia for Biden, and Warnock, and Ossoff in November, and in January of this year. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do through Powered by People, where we're trying not to organize around a person or a candidate, or frankly, right now, not so much even around a party, but around democracy, engagement, and conversation. During the winter storm, we asked all of our volunteers to knock on their neighbors' doors and check in with them. Do you have heat? Do you have water? Do you have food? Do you need a ride, ma'am? Is there something we can do to help? We organized a phone bank where thousands of volunteers called hundreds of thousands of senior citizens to do exactly the same. All that is good enough in itself and an end in itself. But that kind of work in general, knocking on our neighbors' doors, checking in on them, that can build some pretty powerful relationships that can produce the kind of victories and the kind of gatherings that you're talking about when you don't have a visitor from out of town. And so I encourage all of us to do that organizing work week in and week out. And again, this is not easy, and I think this is part of what makes the challenge so acute at this moment. Technology, money, wealth, resources, convenience have conditioned us to, let's just sign that petition and I feel good, I dealt with the thing. I'm going to retweet what Beto said, or I'm going to post this outrage that I feel on Facebook, and I got it out of my system. It was cathartic, I'm done. I did my part. The part doesn't even begin with that. It is putting on your shoes, getting outside and knocking on doors, and having these really uncomfortable, honest conversations with people that sometimes result in the folks saying, you know what, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to have anything to do with politics. But more often than not, I know you know this because you've done it, you meet that grandmother who wants to tell you about her son and her daughter, and you say, you know what, as long as we're talking, we have this meeting every Thursday evening, I'd love for you to come out to the next one, introduce you to the folks who are there, no pressure, but here's the address. I think we've got to be willing to do that work, and I think that's how we get this back, and I think if we fail to do it, that's how we lose it. So I'm happy through Powered by People, our organization, to help with the folks that we've got on our list from Bowie County and send the word out if you're organizing a meeting around these issues. And I'm happy also to come back if that is ever helpful as well. But I wish you luck in whatever you do next, and appreciate the question and the way in which you asked it. Thank you. Last question. No pressure.
I was waiting. I was getting so hungry I started to leave. First thing is, all you have to do is go to a White House citizen line to get the number for the White House. And I think Biden is probably more aware of all the calls that come in than the last president. I think they shut down that line. I don't even think they had it.
Yeah.
But not only say that you want that you want the voting rights, you want him to end the filibuster. That's where he can apply pressure. And he kind of, sort of, maybe doesn't know for sure about the filibuster, and it needs to end. And so when you say that about the voting rights law, say that about the filibuster, because we're not going to get 10 Republicans to vote. So we need 51 Democrats. And so we have to end the filibuster. That is the very first most important thing. Number two, I got kind of lackadaisical during the COVID, and my husband had open heart surgery and all kinds of stuff, that I'm going to revamp Bowie County Indivisible, and I would be happy to help organize a march to the courthouse or wherever, or to help organize on the day they, this made me cry, but the day they confirmed Trump, I took myself to the frigidly cold Austin, Texas that day and stood out there. And of course it didn't do a whole lot of good, but I did what I did. And maybe a lot of people would help, at least boost the Democrats to walk out again if that's what can happen in Texas. I don't know, but we do all matter. And if you need some motivation, Google how Rome fell. Rome did not fall because soldiers defeated anybody. Rome fell because of the apathy of the people. And that's what terrifies me now, is the apathy of the people. I have gotten 2 children that weren't voters, and I don't know how with me they weren't. they weren't, but they vote now. You know, and I went to Dallas and I took the Obama training and I learned to tell my story. and why I need you to go vote. And I needed you to go vote because I needed my son's life to be saved with health care. And I told that story over and over and over and over and over. And I drove to places and I was terrified of public speaking, but I did it anyway. And there's reasons, each of us has our reasons. And if we tell those to other people, they might matter. And for some woman that heard me talk about being afraid my son would die without health care, it might have got her off the couch to go vote that day. You know, but tell your story and tell why it matters. But first, Google White House Citizens Line and then call and say that Biden needs to pressure the Senate in the filibuster.
Wouldn't it be great if the president's kept his daily briefing and they say, you're not going to believe this, but we got 700 calls from Texarkana.
He's gonna say where?
Yeah. Did he not only get 30% to vote in Texarkana?
We're all here.
One closing quick point based on what you said. I know that your travel to the frigid wilds of Austin in 2017 made a difference, because I ran for Senate in 2017 and 2018, and there was so much energy out there from those marches and from people who had committed themselves anew to this democracy in the face of that threat that was posed, after that election in 2016. And so when I would travel the state, I mean, there were so many people. The Indivisibles were organized. The Democratic parties were rejuvenated. Folks were fired up and they were ready to go. And no, we did not beat Ted Cruz, but we helped to elect 12 new state House Democrats, getting us within a 9-member margin. We got 2 new Democrats elected to the House of Representatives, Lizzie Panel Fletcher of Houston, Colin Allred in the Dallas area. And then in Harris County, just one county alone, 17 new African-American women elected to judicial positions. To get organized and active and get out there. Voter turnout, the greatest in Texas in a midterm since 1970, and young voter turnout, to the gentleman's question earlier, up over 500% from the previous midterm. So that wasn't the candidate and it wasn't the party, it was the people that made that happen. Now, we just gotta commit ourselves to doing something like that again. We have good cause at this moment to get into some good trouble. So thank you for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it.